Medimu, who will be presiding over this session. Medimu.
Good afternoon, once more, colleagues. As someone still settling down, we are now proceeding to our afternoon session with the first plenary under the topic, the state of the public service, and the topic at hand will be addressed by the Director General of the DPSA, Melissa McCarthy. Before I invite her over to the podium to give us her address on the subject matter, most of you might know who she is, while some might not even know what she is about. I therefore have requested for her to share with me in particular that which she prepared for me to say about her as a professional individual. Ms. Melissa McCarthy is an activist and a Democrat who started her career in the public sector in 1996. She currently serves, as I indicated, as the Director General of the Department of Public Service and Administration, and that is since March 2020. And amongst her responsibilities are to ensure effective and efficient administration of the department that she is responsible for. And she holds quite a number of credentials as part of her academic record. One of them being a Master's in Philosophy in Coaching Management from the University of Stellenbosch, Master's in Public Policy and Management from the University of Manchester in the UK, a Bachelor's of Arts degree from the University of Port Elizabeth. She also obtained a number of certificates, namely from Wits University and also Gordon Business School, or GIBS, on project management, leadership, financial management, and government communications. In 2021, she obtained a certificate on innovation from INSED INSET, as well as a certificate on public policy analysis from London School of Economics. Ms. McCarthy has also worked in different roles within the public sector, from operations, management, and political strategies, at a level where she was exposed to different areas of decision-making, oversight, management, and operations. She also volunteered in good cause on initiatives that aimed to develop young people, in particular women, and their key capabilities and competencies included, therefore, the policy development, analysis, strategic leadership, planning, monitoring, evaluation, and alike. As I request for you to assist me in welcoming here to the podium, ladies and gentlemen, shall we give a round of applause?
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning to everybody. If you can allow me to say all protocol observed, I think I'll play safe and just say all protocol observed so that I don't miss some of the important people, including delegates, that I need to acknowledge. This is the presentation that I'm going to just share with you, discussing the state of the public service is a very tricky subject. And so I just decided to speak on facts as we understand them in the public service and the DPSA. And so I will be sharing a little bit of some statistics that are going to give us a sense of where things are in respect to the public service. Just in terms of the presentation outline, the next slide, please, guys. These are some of the issues that we are going to look at in terms of our presentation, just the context in which we operate in, as well as our public service in numbers. We look at issues like the age, the population in the public service. The biggest question we asked this question in the workshop, in the summit that we have, on the future of work. Yes, there were two views about it, but I think the most important view, the most popular view was that we are an aging public service, which is why Minister Eliakon was talking about the aging public service. But I'm keen to hear from colleagues who are here today from Labour and employer, or the public service rather, on what their views are on these matters. We look at vacancies, issues around service delivery and our input as public servants, the state of the ICT in the public service, future remuneration policy, next steps. If I may start with introduction, just to highlight that we're all coming from a very difficult period. The period is still difficult even now because COVID is still with us. But the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic came as a rare, unprecedented event, and governments around the globe scrambled with emergency actions. COVID-19 continues to spread like a human suffering and a pain in people's lives. It has killed thousands of public servants as well as members of society. COVID-19 has governments around the world operating in a context of radical uncertainty and faced with difficult trade-offs given the health, economy, and social challenges raised by the crisis. Whilst there has been so much sadness due to loss of lives and attendant psychosocial challenges faced by our employees, this period has also presented a lot of opportunities for government to improve on how it delivers its services through ICT-enabled capabilities, amongst others. Disasters by their nature are unforeseen and unpredictable. So many countries, in addition to South Africa, have experienced disasters, a number of disasters I won't mention. But in respect to this pandemic, I am proud to stand here and acknowledge the role played by public servants, in particular frontline public service personnel, the police, your educators, your healthcare workers, your social workers, your home affairs officers, your correctional services officers, and other categories I have mentioned. These colleagues were in service to our communities throughout the COVID period. And there has also been pockets of those in the back-end offices and who are responsible for business continuity in the public service, who work around the clock to ensure that we live up to the commitments we have made around payment of service providers within 30 days and other things that we do in the back end to ensure that salaries of public servants are paid on time. During the COVID period, we have never had a situation where public servants didn't receive their time because HR officials were not available to process, HR and finance officials were not available to process payments due to COVID, as an example. Just in terms of the public service context, we are guided mainly as DPSA, but also, I think as government broadly, by priority one in terms of building a capable, ethical, and developmental state. Three key areas around this capable, ethical, developmental state is when we speak about the capable state, we talk about the state that has required human capabilities, institutional capacity systems, service processes, and technological platforms to deliver on the NDP through a social contract with people, an ethical state that is driven by constitutional values and principles of public administration and the rule of law, which is focused on progressive realization of socio-economic rights as well as social justice as outlined in the Bill of Rights. A developmental state that aims to meet the people's needs through interventions, developmental, participatory public administration, building an autonomous developmental state driven by the public interest and not individual or sectional interests. It is embedded in South African society, leading an active citizen through partnerships with all sectors of society. Some of the key high-level outcomes that we look at in terms of our performance measures: improved leadership, governance and accountability, functional, efficient and integrated government, professional, meritocratic and ethical public administration, and social compact and engagement with key stakeholders, enhancing confidence and trust on the state. The MTP identifies a number of challenges, capacity challenges that are facing us in the public service. This includes absence of or poor ethics, a difficult political administrative interface, lack of strategic HR in the public service, inappropriate configuration of the state, heavy compliance burden, and when we reflect as the PSA, we reflect and say that we are part of the people who are bringing heavy compliance within government and departments in terms of the compliance issues that we require, which sometimes make my bosses not happy. Failures related to rolling out new technologies and creation of a modern and efficient state. And I think I've dealt with the objectives broadly, but I do want to raise the last point in the slide, which relates to enhancing confidence and trust on the state. I think this is a big issue for us, and as it was indicated earlier on in the speeches, that it is important for us that we build this trust and confidence on the state. Some of the key challenges, there's many challenges, so I also don't want to spend my presentation in just dealing with challenges, but I'm just highlighting some of these challenges that we are faced with in the public service. I think that firstly we have a disjointed government, and which results in poor coordination within departments, interdepartmentally, which means amongst departments, as well, interdepartmentally, which means amongst departments, intra, which means within departments, and sectors, so within sectors that we have to work with. We also have poor levels of accountability and consequences management. The AG reports on this every time around the consequences management in the public service. We have poor financial management, including supply chain management, especially for some of the big service delivery departments. I think there's still capacity issues around financial management. If you were to extend this further to look at public sector broadly, not just the public service, municipalities, the financial management in municipalities seems to be a very big problem. There is poor execution. So we plan, and I don't even want to say that we are good in planning, because if we are good in planning, we should be implementing our plans effectively. So we just have poor execution of plans. And I think also this also has to do with how we translate our plans from the bigger plan, which is the MTP, up to the final plan, which is the implementation plan in particular departments. And what gets missed in the process during that planning. But there are interventions the PLA and the presidents have put in place in respect to this and monitoring. Unethical conduct and corruption in public administration due to inadequate control and lack of accountability. And I suppose due to poor values as well amongst us as public servants who are operating in the public service, because the values are stated in the Constitution. If we were to leave those values that are stated in the Constitution, we wouldn't have some of the challenges that we're having. Outdated departmental structures, our departmental structures are quite outdated and are not going to assist in responding to some of the issues that we have to deal with. There is also a view that Program 1 structures in departments is bloated. We have many people in administration who should be focusing directly on service delivery and frontline support to service delivery, if you like. We have outdated regulations and policy directives. I will speak on actions on some of these issues later on in the presentation. Poor human resource management practices. Our human resources the government, or in the public service rather, focuses on administration and compliance instead of strategic HR. So we have got a system with so much reporting and compliance that people are just chasing reports in HR and are chasing compliance, and they don't seem to have time to think and strategize about how to take our HR to the next level. Poor management and leadership, the role of the SMS collective. I think that something has happened in the public service that has made the SMS collective to abandon their roles in terms of management, in terms of consequences management, in terms of leadership. Poor service delivery. We have here issues around productivity and discipline challenges which also affect service delivery. The worsening, I think one of the broader macroeconomic challenges we know as a country is the worsening crime situation and unsafe communities. We see so many now protests and other things starting to come up again around issues that relate to the safety in our communities. Another macroeconomic challenge of unemployment and worsening economic and fiscal condition. Another macroeconomic challenge of the public debt that is crowding out investments in the public service. So specifically investments in human resources in the public service is being crowded out because there are other issues, economic issues that we have to address. This crowded out we've experienced with COVID in the current MTF cycle where departments have had experienced budget cuts. Personnel budgets have been cut in order to get money to support some of the work that is being done around fighting COVID. A small department like the PSA lost about 60 positions in that process, which becomes really a burden because every employee we have, we should be able to, we need that employee. Wastage in certain sectors, I know that colleagues from Labour continuously raise the issue of wastage. There are sectors that have been identified that are contributing to wastage in the public service. One of the sectors we have had a key interest as the PSA in working on is around the ICT sector, where we believe that there's lots of wastage and a number of things being done in the ICT investments are not bringing real value to the public service. Poor compliance with OHS, this is again an issue that has been raised by colleagues from Labour around poor compliance with OHS. We have been working with the Department of Employment and Labour just to improve the standard and to ensure that we improve our OHS compliance in the public service. But I do think that there's still gaps in some departments and issues that require attention on a continuous basis. Just looking at the public service in numbers, Chairperson, when I talk about the public service, I need to clarify this conceptual issue. I talk about national and provincial government. I'm not including entities in national and provincial government. So those many entities there that are within the departments are not counted. We are counting the core public servants who are in the national and provincial departments. In terms of our legislation, actually defines public service as that in that scope, which is why we're focusing on that scope. Just in terms of the global picture, we're looking at about 1.2 million employees in the public service, and out of this 1.2, I can't even see my own out of this 1.2 million public servants, we have a racial breakdown of 82% Africans, 2% Asian, 9% colored, and 7% white. I think that is going to be the other numbers that I want to talk to. The issues of appointment by gender. In terms of appointment by gender, male employees in the public service are at 38%, and female employees are at 62%. This is the broader figure in respect to the number of 1.2 million. But when you go into detail, male employees at SMS level are at 56.22%, and female employees at SMS level are at 42%. So we are not meeting the requirement, the policy directive of 50% that we have set ourselves for in the public service. 65% of our employees are in the front line. They are playing frontline service role, teachers, educators, home affairs officials, correctional services officials, and social workers, etc. Women healthcare workers as well. Women make up 56%. However, the number changes from level upwards in terms of representation. So there's women at the lower levels, but as you go up higher, there's more men than women. 47% women representation at levels 11 and 12, 38% at level 13, 27% at level 14 and 15, 19% at level 16. Departments are struggling to meet transformational targets despite policies being in place. And how the system and the setup is in the public service is that the DGs or head of departments who are accounting officers have a responsibility to account around the implementation of these policy directives. So as TPSA, we collect the stats, we analyze the numbers, we write to them, we ask what are the problems, we engage with them, what are the problems, what do you commit to do, but at the end, the accounting officers have a responsibility to deliver. If they fail to deliver, their ministers, what their executive authorities have a responsibility to take the letters up to with them. For us, we can do our reports and report to Parliament and monitor and report to Cabinet, but from the consequences management, there is not much we can do as a department, but the ministers that are responsible for the departments, there's a lot that they can do to assist us to achieve this. Public service human resource management and development policies are not adequately achieving the desired outcomes with respect to effectively building and maintaining a highly skilled public service as well. If you look at public servants by dispensation, which is the next graph, and I think that there's a slide that explains this, and I can't see it clearly, but I can tell you that 65% of our employees, 65.8% of our employees are OSD employees. So which explains to you the wage bill issues that we have to deal with, because OSD employees are paid in higher scales compared to the general employees in most categories. So 65% of the workforce is OSD employees, and 9% is SMS, which is your directors, chief directors, DDGs, and DGs. I think it's important that I stated it on this slide because we always hear that complaints that there's too many managers in the public service. But if you look globally, it's 9%, estimated at about 9,339 employees, supervising and managing a workforce of 1.2 million employees. We then have another category, which is the mid-management service. The mid-management service is at 1.4%, which is 17,063. And then the last category that we have there is the one at 32% is other, which means the lower levels. Just in terms of progress, in terms of our strategies for transformation, I think when we look at this picture and where we come from, we should be proud that we come from an era where we were like a 5% of women participating actively in the public service to an era where we are at 44% currently. We should be in a better position. We should aim to meet the 50% and go beyond. My view and my principle in general is that the 50% is just a minimum. It's not like it's achieved once you're at 50%, because if you sit at 50%, and I've seen this happen in my department, you sit at 50%, the lady who was helping you to be at 50% resigns. Immediately, you are not achieving your target again. So it's important that we always try and be a little bit extra than 50%. But this is the journey that we have walked in the public service in terms of our representation of women. This is the journey we have walked in terms of representation of people with disabilities. That is the next slide. This journey, where in 1995 we were literally like at 0%, 1996 we were at 0.2%, we are currently at 1.4%. We have grown nicely, but we are stagnating. And we need to deal with that stagnation and find what are the issues that we need to do. I have listened to colleagues speaking about the issue of people with disabilities with interest. There is a view that says we don't have enough supply from the market of people with disabilities to accommodate into the roles and responsibilities in the public service. There's also a view that says there's a larger percentage of people with disabilities, especially the psychosocial, mental-related disabilities that are not declared. But we have these people in the public service. And when we look at our reports from GEMS, the reports are showing us very large numbers of people who are belonging in this category because of the type of medication and the type of support, medical support that they are getting. However, they have not declared their disability, and therefore we cannot use those figures to pump up our figures. But we have an acknowledgement that we think that we have more people in the system who are disabled, but others are not declaring their disability. However, we still have a responsibility to reach the targets that we have set for ourselves. Now, going into the average age, or rather the issues of age in the public service, that slide that I just given you there. 25% of our employees are between 35 years and younger. 25%. And then 29% of our employees are between the ages of 26 and 25 years, which gives us employees who are 54%, 45 years old and younger. Then we have 43% between ages of 46 and 60 years. Probably most of us who are here falling that category. 3%, most of us from government who are here falling that category of 43%. 3% are older than 60. So the majority of our employees in the public service are between the ages of 35 and 55 years old. In respect to OSD is now breaking the bigger figure into smaller portions. OSDs, we have 26% of total OSDs who are 35 years and below. 62% in age group of 36 to 55 years, and 16% age 56 and above. These are the people who are at the core of service delivery because they are specialists, they are technical people who are really dealing with service delivery issues. DG Health is here, and I suspect that the health care sector accounts for that 16% age 56 and above a lot because we noticed that lots of specialists, doctors within the health care sector are quite at an older level. We hope that there are more being groomed below so that they can take over these roles and responsibilities. Senior management service in the public service, 1.4% is 35 years old and below. This is not acceptable. This is actually sad because it means we just have a very small number, a handful number of young people, real young people, because those who are 35 and below are the real young people in terms of youth population in the country. 71% are between the ages of 36 and 55 years. In terms of mid-management, 7.5% is 35 and below. Again, there's a problem here of representation of young people. 74% between ages of 36 and 55 years. Below SMS, 23% are 35 years and older, 35 years old and below, and then 63% between 36 and 55 years. We are generally showing good trends with majority between ages 35 and 55 years old. This shows retention of staff who remains in the public service. The pipeline for the public service, I think the introduction of internship has helped define the pipeline for the public service so that many started as interns, and then when the internship ends, sometimes they get retained as contractors until there's vacancies available and they can be employed. And others go through immediately and they get appointed, they apply, they get appointed into the system and they go into the system. but their growth into the system is quite slow. Which is why we see at SMS level and at MMS level a very low numbers of young people. We need to focus on continuous development of our professional capability in the public service. We need to focus on SMS and MMS and bring in younger people, especially in specialist positions. So there's always been an argument that, I think there's a number of years you need to, in order to be a director in government, like 6 to 8 years experience, 5 to 6 years, so I can't remember the numbers. But there's again different views around this, and we are debating these issues as well. We are updating our regulations. There is a view that says that in specialist roles, you have to fast-track young people into these positions so that they can be able to do the work that they need to do at that level. And we've seen in the future for work in that we have invited a treasury to come and speak to us because they've done it. They've done the fast-tracking of young people. They have the programs that they develop the young people, train them, the accountants, and then they fast-track them into the system. And these young people get into the system as directors and etc. So we are learning from that capability as we change our regulations and see how we can build it and also ensure that we avoid abuse, because somebody who's a director in program 1, which is administration, and somebody who's a director in core business have two different responsibilities. Certainly in administration, you need to have a tested leadership capability or management capability because you're going to reach large numbers of people. If you're a director HR, you're going to reach a very large number of people compared to somebody who's a technical specialist, maybe an IT, a blockchain expert, or a fire expert in DCPT, as an example. So the question remains, are we engaging or trying public service? In terms of vacancy rate, I think that the Deputy President of COSATU raised this issue as well around the vacancy rate strongly. It's showing a very bad picture. This is one of the slides I'm not proud to present because you can see it's really opening up. In 2019, quarter 3, we were in a better position compared to where we are now. We are at 12.7% in terms of vacancies in the public service. Whilst I talk about the vacancies, I just need to caution something I pick up from the public service report, the Public Service Commission state of the public service report, where they are saying the standard measures for lack of staff invariably do not give a realistic picture of the staffing situations in a department. In that, vacancy rates are calculated as a percentage of the post-establishment of a department. And if the post-establishment has not been recently reviewed in relation to workloads, the staffing situation might even be worse than indicated. These indicators need to be considered in relation to the workload of specific sections in a department. There are departments that for years have not submitted their structure to be reviewed by the department by the PSA. So you can realize that what happens in those departments in terms of the vacancy rate may be worse than the situation that we are reporting here. Because whilst they are not updating their structure, their work demands continue to change within those particular departments. So this is basically our vacancy rate total is at 12.16%. We have the Eastern Cape at 16.45%. If you were to break this down to departments within a province or national departments, you would see that our service delivery departments, particularly health and education, in provinces specifically, are really struggling with the vacancy rates in filling the vacancies. And I think this affects delivery of services in those departments. Free State Province is sitting well at 5.87 below the 10% threshold. Gauteng is sitting at 9.39%. KwaZulu-Natal at 13.44%. Limpopo at 15%, 15.56%. Mpumalanga at 9.61%. National departments are sitting at 10.58%. Northwest 16.34%. Northern Cape 18.25%. Then the Western Cape is at 11.9%. We have been engaging departments, and quarterly we engage with departments because we monitor this on a quarterly basis. And one of the advices we have given to the department is that for those positions that are affected by the budget cuts, or what Treasury calls reprioritization, they don't call them budget cuts, they call them reprioritization. The reprioritization of personnel that is affecting those departments, it's important that they also go back to their structures and remove those positions that are affected, which would be vacancies, remove from the structures into the HR plans of the department, so that when you talk about the vacancy rate, you don't count positions that you don't have money to fill in any case. Across all occupational categories, health has a total number of 336,317 posts, of which 39,367 are vacant, and 296,950 are filled. Education has a total number of 543,833 posts, of which 73,000 are vacant and 477,45 are filled. Therefore, the total number of vacant posts in health and education is 68% of the total number of vacant posts in the public service. The total posts in health and education is 880,150, which is the 66% of the total posts in the public service. OSGs were introduced to recruit and retain highly skilled South Africans within the public service. However, challenges arose during implementation as OSGs ended up being implemented in occupations that don't require highly skilled people. I will not mention the occupations that do not require highly skilled people for the sake of peace, but I will highlight that it's important I must keep peace. But I will highlight that when the deputy president of the House spoke earlier on, he touched on the issue of OSTs. He touched on the issue of OSTs. Oh, okay. When I received the correction, thank you. When they said he was representing organized labor. Thank you. I apologize. So, should I say the president of organized labor? Should I say when President Shiname? That's good. Okay. So when President Shiname was speaking about OSTs, yes, that discussion we need to engage on it, because we have categories of people who should not be on OSTs or OSTs. OSTs are not a problem on its own for those categories of people that really qualify, but there's other problems with OSTs that make people want to stay in technical roles and not move to management roles because they are paid better in technical roles. So a person can be an assistant director and be earning at a director level as a technical person. But if they can't move to a deputy director position, which is a management role, because they will lose in terms of the salary that they're currently earning. And something you must find a way of fixing when you are reviewing the OSTs. 55% of the current vacancies are OST posts, and this impacts on service delivery. So we have about 91,333 posts which are OST posts and which are vacancies. The issues around the political administrative interface remains a major challenge and contributes to the high turnover within SMS bands, in particular bands C and D, which is the DGs and DGs. This band is far exceeding 10% in terms of vacancies. So broadly, key drivers of vacancies include budget cuts, and the COVID intervention support being the latest that resulted in budget cuts, limited technical expertise in certain areas, in some sectors, so people advertise positions and they don't get the skills that they are looking for. Changes in departmental structures, there are departments that are perpetually on restructuring or realignment, or where posts are frozen and they don't get advertised because either the minister and the teacher are still thinking, and they take forever to think, and then there's a reshuffle. Another minister comes and wants to change things, and I'm not complaining about ministers, I'm just reflecting. Yes, the intelligence career limiting minister, but these are the experiences. And then there's also manual processes that our systems in government, recruitment systems for the majority of us are manual. I don't want to talk about the IT interventions that government has tried to implement, and they have not produced anything tangible at this stage. It's not my mandate right now to talk about that. Just in terms of state service delivery, state of service delivery, what we are reflecting here is a picture of service delivery portals. We must not be fooled by the fact that service delivery portals dropped drastically in 2020-21. It's simply because of COVID. That people, there were state of emergencies and was rather state of disasters, and people couldn't go on the streets and organize themselves into numbers. But we have serious problems in relation to protests around crime, around service delivery issue. Electricity and water is one of the main challenges that are facing us. And we know that electricity, the challenge of protests in relation to electricity relates really to inefficiencies and other challenges that ESCOM is experiencing. And also there's immigration issues around the foreigners who are in the country, in our communities, who get blamed from time to time for this or that. Those relations there between foreigners and our communities. And there's also capacity challenges and capability challenges that affect department at the level of cluster functioning. I raised the issue of coordination and disjointed government. And this results in silo functioning. Departments tend to work on their own, and not much attention is given to partnerships. And our IGR coordination structures can be dysfunctional at times, especially at an administration level. Whilst things are moving at political level and at DDG level, at the level of the foot soldiers, there's always a gap in challenges. There's also lack of accountability for wrongdoing. That's just some of the stuff that we have picked up from media. Our failure to deliver services leads to protests that erode the legitimacy of the state, weakens the public service and its capacity to deliver. The public service has been systematically and deliberately weakened, mostly through the structuring of its institutional capacity, weak appointments and dismissals of key individuals in strategic positions at times. The state of ICT as a fourth area, and maybe the last main area. What we are highlighting in this slide, I'm not going to go into detail. The next slide, please. What we are highlighting in this slide is that, according to AG, we have weak IT controls in government. And in 2019, we said at 88% of departments that had weak IT controls. In 2020, we had 92%. In 2021, we were at 90%. In terms of IT project failures, again, findings from AG, 50% of 34 IT projects selected did not meet business expectations by 2021. And remember, that 50% were paid money at the state. So when you look at figures of spending by government on IT, you realize that we spend lots of money. In fact, the next area I want to speak about, our calculations, which we do with Treasury, show us in 2018 we spent 19.58 billion in IT. In 2019 we spent 21.26 billion in IT. In 2020 we spent 21.9 billion. The total for the past 3 years, for those 3 years, was 61 billion. But we don't have much data to show for it. Because our systems are still paper-driven, our systems are still disjointed. Even our e-services, we cannot start a process from beginning to an end. There's very few departments like Home Affairs who can do that. But you can start a process from beginning to an end in relation to your providing that service through e-services platforms in the public service. There's a stage when a member of public must come to an office and stand in a queue and sign some form before they can receive the service. So we think that there's lots of wastage that is sitting in this space, and it requires attention. Weak IT governance as well. 63% of departments in 2019 had weak IT governance. 65% had weak IT governance in 2020 and 63% in 2021. IT contract failures, 25% of 37 IT contracts did not yield the intended benefits. This is the HA report. On this data we're getting from the HA reports. So we need replication and sharing of innovation to improve service delivery and administration. ICT functions struggle to transform frontline services as well as back-end processes. While COVID accelerated some digitization, most departments are still manual and paper-based. Large ICT projects struggle to reach completion. ICT systems largely in silos, lacking integration, lack of full use of licenses paid for. We pay for lots of ICT licenses, but these are not used fully and they're not being shared. Out of, we have 4,000, we have 0.1% of employees in the public service who are employees that are in ICT functions. And I saw some statistics, but they're not here, that I think about 60% of them will be going in retirement in the next 5 to 10 years. So, so we need to inject again capability and energy around ICT and function in the public service. We need to prioritize reskilling and upskilling public service towards the capacitation of IT functions. Public service ICT costs are typically inflated in comparison to private sector. So what we pay in the public sector for, there's something, I can't remember, there's something that the DG, asked for quotes in the private sector for and quotes in the public sector, and the numbers were just so wide for the quotes from CETA compared to the quotes that he received in the private sector. And yet, he can't use directly the quotes from the private sector because we are not into an arrangement to work via CETA in terms of ICT spending in the public service. Now, ICT procurement is a major stumbling block in the digital journey, in the digitalization journey. So the role of CETA has come into question all the time, and I think it's a conversation that those who are responsible should quickly. I don't even want to speak about IFNS minister. The role of CETA, the ministers who are responsible and the DGs, I think there's a need to quickly deal with this matter because CETA is really a problem in the system and it's a stumbling block. Severe shortage of ICT capacity, which is on bodies and skilled ICT specialists across the public service. So this digitalization agenda we talk about, we're going to struggle with it if we don't address the issue of ICT capability. There is a need to focus ICT skills of the future to keep up with rapid change and reskilling and upskilling in the public service. I will not read this in detail, but it's a warning sign that we received in the report from the HE, just around the vulnerabilities and weaknesses in terms of our IT capabilities. Thinking about future of work, we just presented this graph, which is the next graph, on the future of work. It's a very busy graph, but all it says is that for us to get to where we want to do, the interface between the employer or employee, HR, and IT, and the necessary platforms that we need to put in place is very important. So automation of HR should no longer be a dream for us. All our HR processes should be automated. And those employees in HR, in supply chain, and in finance, where there's a lot of automation that must take place in program-wise, we should develop a program of reskilling them. Because some of them are very young, they still have long life in the public service. We should develop a program of reskilling them. CETA has a program that looks at IT literacy. I hope I'm mentioning it properly, but it's around building just the literacy capabilities of employees in the public service, and we should popularize that program and probably make it mandatory for the public servants to attend to it. Just on remuneration matters, I think what we are highlighting here is that we understand that the numbers and other things, Treasury will deal with them. Ours is really in respect to the policy work that needs to be done, because we need better management of the government wage bill to ensure long-term sustainability. We need phased elimination of unjustified disparities within the broader public sector, the public service, local government, and public entities and state-owned enterprises. So, in the state, okay, I don't even want to talk about the state-owned enterprises like your big SOCs like your ESCOMs and others. Just in the public service, you will have a department that has a DG who earns at a certain level. You have an entity that has a CEO. An entity that has a CEO who's running with 20 or 30 people who earns down at the level that the DG is earning. So these are some of the disparities that we are talking about. And it goes down, it's not just about the DG, even the employees. The PA, there is probably earning by the PA in the public service. So these are some of the disparities that we need to deal with. And these ones, ministers need a lot of political will to deal with them. Because we see government all the time, we're talking about these things, but we are not seeing progress in terms of the alignment and the implementation. It is starting somewhere to do something about it. And every time we get critique from Labour, it's exactly around these issues that other people are getting their salary increases, we in the public service are not getting salary increases, and we are also not getting salary increases in the manner that we think we should. I'm now going to shift into my last part, which is around what's next. So there's a lot that can be done, but what I chose to do is to speak on some of the work that is already in the pipeline. So that it's not things that we are seen to be promising at a high level, are there, they're still at a top level, but most of the things are the things that are in our plans, things that we're talking about in the public service working. Just on cutting the red tape, I spoke a lot about compliance obligations and etc. We have engaged in a big review around our regulations as well as the policy directives. We should, in the incoming financial year, finalizing the process. The idea is to really reduce reporting obligations for people and to find a mechanism of broadening access into the public service, as well as ensuring that the numbers of young people in the public service improves, amongst other things, and just align a number of issues in respect to this. When I looked at our reports, and I always say to colleagues at DPSA that before I worked at DPSA as a teacher, I've worked in the public service, and therefore I have been a client of DPSA. And I'm not lying when I say in a financial year, you have about 24 reports on program 1 that you must send to DPSA, just on issues around HR, so many issues that we have to deal with. It's important that we integrate. It's important that we release space and time for managers in the public sector and employees to focus on work, not to focus on reporting. So we have to revisit our reporting requirements, and we have to see how we consolidate things and integrate things, just as the DPSA are doing. And there's a project we're involved with Treasury and DPME, and we have counted in excess of 200 reporting obligations on administration issues in the public service, when we include all other departments. So that rationalization is very important. Secondly, so through this project, we want to be able to do that. Secondly, we want to position public service HR as a strategic rather than compliance function. So HR has to be responsive, knowledgeable, and articulate as they advise business. One of the activities that we have started to work on is research work around the future of work in the public service, the skill surveys that we need to do in the public service, human capital strategy which must be developed. This is a task we were given by Cabinet last year, and it's a task that we're moving with, but it's been moving quite slowly, and we have received some resources and partnerships from donor agencies to help us move faster on the task. Training of our HR managers and teams on strategic HR, the industry is being engaged in this as well, and other training providers. Automation of HR processes is an emergency for us. Minister Godongwana, we are stuck with the IFMS elite stories and with the instruction from Treasury that we cannot buy systems for Program 1 outside of the IFMS. But we have decided we are going to write a request to get out of this arrangement so that there are systems already in implementation. CITA has a system in implementation that we can just upscale. Many provinces are also having systems that they are using for HR. So I think that there is communication that's coming to Treasury in respect to this. We've been waiting for IFMS for years, and it's not delivering on what it's expected to deliver on. And also there's an issue around reskilling of public servants that we are working with CITA. In terms of the third item around decisive and resilient values-driven leadership in the public service, we have developed a revitalized particular strategy which has been approved by government. We want to introduce specific particular standards for departments to implement. It could be things around queues, around all the things that are happening at the level of service delivery. We are integrating consumer values as well as principles in service delivery. Accountability and consequences management as well. It's an issue that we continuously engage with. Management of career incidents of HODs, retention of HODs are some of the work that we are doing, instructed by the NDP. In terms of building an ethical state and fighting corruption, the Minister spoke earlier on about the rollout of lifestyle audits in the public service, improvements in discipline management, work that we need to do around that, including the review of the disciplinary codes, which obviously was in partnership with our colleagues in labor. Values-based public service, which means we must focus on encouraging prevention and self-regulation. So we don't wait until somebody commits an act of corruption, but we focus on working with public servants to ensure alignment of their personal values with alignment of the public service, which are already prescribed in the Constitution for us. In terms of ICT, we need to strengthen the role of CIOs. There are departments where an IT project gets conceptualized and completed and implemented without the involvement of CIOs. So we're learning from Treasury to ensure that the role of CIOs must be a legislated role. Because when things go wrong, that's why you have many projects that cannot yield results, because CIOs will say, no, I don't know, I was not involved in that project. So there can't be spending on ICT without the involvement of the CIO department. In terms of productivity, I challenge this productivity one. Let me finish the ICT one. Digital transformation policy and strategy for the public service. We're working with DCDT and presidency around this and other partners. Remote working capabilities. The biggest issue with remote working is really challenges with tools of trade, as well as reporting and monitoring capacity. So there's work we've done in this. We have prepared guidelines on remote working for those departments that can implement remote working. But DGs or accounting officers need to look at the issue of tools of trade. Some departments, like policy departments, can thrive in a remote working environment, but some departments is going to be difficult for them. So we can't treat all departments as one in respect to that. And then some cost saving and sharing opportunities and initiatives, like the issue we raised about sharing of licenses, ICT licensing, etc. And then on productivity, we need a full commitment from labor and from employer around implementation of the public service charter, so that it doesn't just become a document that gathers dust, and there must be reporting on the deliverables that we have committed ourselves to through the PSCBC. And I hope that the leadership of PSCBC will also note the matter so that it goes continuously into the agenda of the PSCBC for reporting in terms of progress. Professionalization of the public service, there's lots of work we are doing at this stage, working with the NSG who are leading the process of developing the framework, working with other structures within government and civil society. And also there's an issue around the need to improve on delegations in the public service. There are departments that, so in terms of the current Public Service Act, the executive authority delegates HR and other functions to the DG or the head of department. But if you go to provinces, to departments, they are, starting here in Gauteng, there are NECs who do not delegate responsibilities to head of departments. So heads of departments are unable to do anything because the NEC has to appoint even a cleaner in the department because they don't want to delegate that responsibility. Sometimes they delegate, and when there's a challenge of a relationship between the NEC and the DG and the HOD, the NEC take all her deviations back and wants to do everything herself. It is not practical in terms of running the organization, but you're going to have a political principle running everything in the department. So we have proposed that we must amend the Public Service Act to give direct delegations to the heads of departments and the DGs. And I know that some of the leadership are not happy with that. I know that the former minister, I know about it, especially the MECs complaining about it, but our interest is stability of government and where to continue government. Joint government, there's work that the presidency is doing around strengthening the cluster system and closer working with sectors in the public service. And we have proposed a single public administration management bill. This bill, it's a PEM bill, actually, not single, but PEM bill. Public administration management bill, let's drop the single, but it aims to ensure that there is a single public administration. Now, this will help us to join government in HR matters on sharing of systems and sharing of information and a lot of things. Both this bill and the one I talked about of the Public Service Act are at the PSCPC at the moment. The last part on this around building state capacity, what's next? In terms of remuneration policy, we need to finalize our personnel expenditure review in 2022, and including, amongst others, we need to look at the issue of review of OSDs, allowances and leave. I know the issue of allowances and leave is a very sensitive issue to labor, and our view currently is that let's sit around the table, let's see. Our intention is not necessarily to take away what employees already have, but it's how do we move forward. Currently, leave costs us around 100 billion on leave. When you provide for leave completely the public service, it's around 100 billion. And we think that we can do something to manage those figures as well. Develop new remuneration policy framework for the public sector. I understand that there is a draft remuneration policy that was done in the public service. I am not sure how far that process is, but we pick up on that process and ensure that we update with some of the information that we get from personal expenditure review process. Review the role and composition of the Committee of Ministers. What we are proposing here is that all ministers who have to do with sectors and the public entities and related to issues that are bargaining issues, they have to have one place where they meet and sit and engage. So that because every decision that is taken, or maybe I should say, to be safe to say, most of the decisions that are taken in the different bargaining councils in government have an impact on the fiscals. So there has to be a better level of coordination. We are not calling for collapsing all into one. We are calling for a coordination mechanism that makes sure that SALGA does not go and agree on a salary increase without going through the process of the ministers, where Minister of Finance, Minister of the DSA, and other ministers are sitting. Equally, DPE does not go and agree with boards on salary increases without going through this particular process, because we are all really taking from the same fiscals. And we're looking at the issues, the impact of the different legislations, and there's a work that you are doing around that particular area. Consider the feasibility of implementing a single job evaluation system for the various entities in the public sector. This is how we're going to deal with the issue of different salaries for different roles as well. Let's operate from the same book. A job of a PA is a job of a PA, and therefore we operate accordingly in that manner. On ongoing training, of course, I've spoken about this. Innovation is a big issue for us. Forecasting and scenario planning. These are some of the skills we need for our SMS members and even staff below SMS. And we need to have a deliberate focus on some of the top 10 skills and build these top 10 skills in the public service. I think the World Economic Forum has said a lot about the top 10 skills that we're going to need for the future. And the future being now. Equity matters, we need to focus on reviewing our sexual harassment policy to also integrate issues of ILO, and I think it's ILO 190, and as well as just focusing on bullying and focusing as well on reporting of sexual harassment cases in a manner that is safe. Because currently, one of the reasons people give us why they don't report sexual harassment cases is that it looks like at times they have to report to the person who's harassing them. So if the DG is the one responsible for sexually harassing people in the department, you are still expected to report to the DG about the sexual harassment cases that you are experiencing. So it becomes a challenge and people end up not reporting those things. We need to improve accountability measures for accounting officers to achieve equity targets for women, youth, and people with disabilities. What we have done with DPME is to bring back the targets of women, youth, and people with disabilities into the annual performance plans of departments. In that way, we have to report on these matters. They are not kept as a side issue, so it's always on your face. And we are exploring also integrating into the performance plans, the performance contracts of accounting officers. In conclusion, Chair, the rigidity of the regulatory frameworks has not enabled service delivery, but promotes malicious compliance, which has largely contributed to limited scope to think outside of preconceived planning frameworks, disjuncture between institutional compliance or due diligence and citizen satisfaction is worrying. Communities that are largely being faceless with participation projects to legitimize institutions. Their rhetoric is developmental, but public administration is largely rigid and stiff. And we need it to be developmental, and we need to work around these particular issues. And from our side, we are committed to implementing the resolutions of this summit. And I do think that once the summit is over, there must be a mechanism in terms, Minister, of how there is monitoring of the implementation to ensure that there is implementation. Also, at a bargaining council level, there must be a mechanism where there's reporting on a continuous basis so that we don't sit for a long time and then people get changed jobs and everything and we forget about the commitments that we made. I think that it's important that those departments that are affected by commitments that have been made here, we will write to them, we will engage with them, we will request their plans. I am happy that we have the DG of Health here and the DG for PSC, Public Service Commission, who are here today. And we have a number of officials. I think a majority of our government departments, especially the sector departments, are represented by officials at senior level, which is at DG level and chief director level. And we are hoping that we will take the message back to our departments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, DG, for your elaborate presentation on the state of the public service. Colleagues, my understanding is that the presentation will be shared with the Office of the General Secretary, Mr. Kweki, and it can be shared with yourselves at a later stage. And I've also noted from the presentation itself that some of the issues covered by the DG's artworks of presentation are featured as part of the commissions that are set aside for the next time to phase. However, I will afford the DG to take one or two questions, should there be any from the floor. And I request members of the Secretariat to assist with the mics and also the identification of individuals who intend asking questions. As it may.
Chairperson, I just refer that there are 4 mics on each side. You to go that you're not related to the mics, which is have to move to a stand mic.
All right, thank you very much for that, GS. Please indicate your name and the establishment from which you come from and proceed to ask your question. Is that Comrade Priscilla? It's that over to you. That's the only person that I have noted on the floor. Okay, on my left-hand side, I see there are 3 hands from the front. GS, I note you, and colleagues behind you, I noted 2 of you, including the President of Neham. Those are the 5 things that I have noted, and we will continue in that order.
Thank you, Chair. Some point we wish to appreciate the presentation of the DG. And when it comes to the issue of the capable state, we just concerned and we have questions on how do we strike the balance there. Because currently, if you speak of a capable state, the state needs to have a human capital. Human capital that is enough in order to ensure that they are offering that service or they are rendering that specific services. And if you do not have the balance between the human capital, including the physical resources that the workers have to utilize, then the capability thereof to perform that work or that specific duty, it will be rendered otherwise. And this goes to the impact of the non-filling of vacant posts, the impact thereof, because those posts that are left vacant, those who are left in the system, they end up carrying the responsibility of others because those posts were left vacant for a long time. An example we can put in the police, the establishment in 2010, it was around 190,000. It went down to 188,000. And as we speak, now it is around it is less than 180,000. And when we look into how the setup is, you would be lucky if you find that in a province there are 2 water cannons, because each province has only 1 water cannon. And when we look back into the July unrest, it showed us clearly that the lack of the human capital and the lack of the physical resources, it makes the state not to be capable to render a service when it is needed. Because if we are to have unrest in more than 2 provinces like we had in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, then the economic development, it would not be able to be achieved, because in order for investors to come and invest in a specific country, they need to see the safety and stability within that specific country. So I think when we speak about the issue of the capability of the state, this issue of the non-filling of vacant posts, we need to look into the impact thereof. We need to look further into the human capital. We need to look further as well into the issue of fiscal resources, so that we can be able to strike a clear balance in between. So if maybe, we could be able to hear how do you further pronounce, meaning the employer to pronounce themselves in relation to those issues, I think it would really assist us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, colleagues. As I indicated, there are commissions that are set aside in the next 2 days. Try to minimize your questions and be as direct as possible. GS,
start by thanking the DG for the presentation and also for saving us time tomorrow on the earlier presentation that is supposed to take place tomorrow, because she has covered that presentation. So it means we'll have enough time for commissions tomorrow, starting at 9 o'clock. So thank you. Now, when we were preparing for this summit, there were discussions about what should be the focus. One of the things we agreed was that this summit is not going to be used as a negotiation platform. Issues of negotiations must stay at the PSUs. Now, some of the issues she has touched, which I'm saying that presentation tomorrow is irrelevant, are issues emanating from collective agreements concluded in the PSUs. Therefore, the discussion about them must go to the PSUs. That includes the whole thing about the OSD and so on and so forth. We're not going to amend the OSD yet in the summit, because that is a collective agreement and many other things. So we need to be clear about that. The second thing I want to raise, maybe just a first question. The DG talks about the developmental state and so on, which is the intention, of this government expressing the NDP and so on. But what we're not getting is what are the features and characters of the current South African state. We can be assisted because you can't be claiming to be leading a developmental stage when you can't tell us what are the features and characters of the current state. The next thing, maybe the last question. An issue was raised earlier in the presentation of the representative of labor. And the DG doesn't deal with this matter, properly. She talks about it as it relates to ICT, not the product. The elephant in the room of goods and services. And there's evidence actually published by the South African State SA and National Treasury about government expenditure on goods and services, inflation rate, and GDP growth. Now, if you are not, as government, scapegoating the public servants, in terms of this issue of or how the Treasury makes the justification in this card for the wage bill. Don't you think that the justification, or at least the information published, because it says government spending on goods and services exceeds the GDP growth rate by a huge margin, which means that it's not affordable. Secondly, government spending on goods and services is always higher than inflation. And this is what this information public shows us. So if we are not scapegoating public service, don't you think that justification is more relevant on this item of goods and services than the wage bill? Lastly, what is the actual expenditure of the wage bill as it relates to just this cohort of the PSPC, or that falls within the PSPC, as it relates to the GDP? So that we understand this justification, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, I noted the hands from my colleagues sitting behind you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for
the fixed establishment in relation to the vacancies we're talking about? What particular area? Because the DG of Health is here. Since 2006, public health has lost about 92 health workers. This is 2006. In terms of the human resource strategy, 28 of the department, at least by 2025, we need to have 97 more public health workers. So the issue is this. DG speaks about the 9,000 vacancies, which raises the question whether the data they are using now as to reflect the state of the public service is actually indicative of where we need to be. Because employment in the public sector over the past 10 years has been static. We've been around 1.2 since 2010. Population has increased by more than 6 million, which means the public service is actually shrunk. And it's reflected, for example, with policing. Last year, the SARS wanted to increase its workforce from 181,000 to 191,000. Instead, it was told to cut. But it was only after the July riots that we saw the President talking about 9,000 additional. So it's unclear whether the data is backward looking or actually talking about in line with the population growth, in line with the needs of. We can't have about 60 million people being protected by around 191 police, which includes actual staff in the offices. So that is a huge issue in relation to, in fact, even our parliament being burned down because there was no security. Thank you.
Thanks, Comrade. Again, we are reminding you direct with your questions. If you ask a question and you answer yourself, we make it impossible for the DG to attend to the question. The next speaker. I saw another hand behind you. You see that question? No, your other question. But if you comment,
So, I'm going to be precise. DG, well, comrades have already welcomed the presentation. But your key priority number 4 is very problematic. We can't be talking about, I think it's 4, we can't be talking about lifestyle audits of public servants when we know stealing. Arrest them first, then come to the public servants. I think it's number 7 that speaks about productivity. You can't want to subject public servants to the public service charter when there are so many vacancy rates. How much they function? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's for the first time you being precise. And I see your question is covered by you as well. I am going to be able to see.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I don't have to teach you some of the questions. Yeah, finally. Some of the questions are a little political, and it would be career limiting for the DG to respond to them. Like the last one on lifestyle policy.
think, comrades, sorry, I think, colleagues, let's be honest with one another. Stealing starts at the point at which a decision is made. It doesn't start with minister, it doesn't start with DG, it doesn't start with supply chain management. Stealing starts at the level at which a decision originates. Because some of the decisions that are taken are designed to open up space for theft and corruption. And there are many examples that we could put to the table. So if we can just all agree on that one. Singamasela nje generally. No, I will explain why I say that. Typical example is what Minister Mutwabeli has been dealing with. And if we look at it from a holistic perspective, we must just really understand how it is that we're bringing South Africa to its knees and opening up space for criminals from all over the world to come into South Africa and practice criminality, but not only that, to kill our nation. So I think we need to really be specific. And I'm not saying stealing does not happen at the level of ministers. I will never say that. But all I'm saying is that there's a holistic picture that we need to adopt in trying to deal with issues of corruption and unethical behavior. But as the Minister for Public Service and Administration, my responsibility, according to the Public Service Act, only is at the level of where we are all converging today. I'm responsible for fighting corruption in the public service. Anything else above me is above my pay grade. Lifestyle audits for ministers and deputy ministers, MECs, as well as premiers, must happen. We should all be subjected to the same that the civil servants are being subjected to. Let's have these lifestyle audits implemented at the level above me, because I cannot subject my colleagues to a lifestyle audit. The presidency must subject all of us at my level, at the provincial level, and also with premiers. That should happen. That's the one area that I agree with, that lifestyle audits should be all-encompassing, because theft and corruption happens at all levels. The next one that I'd like to deal with is the current state of affairs that was asked, I think, by DGS. The current state of affairs, in responding to it, I will give examples that will speak to the issue that was raised earlier on about the first question that was raised, and the example about sex was given, and also the fourth one that was also raised about policing and the shortage of police. So in dealing with the current state of affairs, you will get the answers to the other questions that have been raised. One of the biggest problems in the public service, and this is why tomorrow I am opening a workshop at DPSA that deals with building the capacity of the state to deliver on its mandate. But not only that, we need to start with assessing whether or not we have the right tools to determine whether or not we are addressing the hopes and aspirations and needs of citizens, and we have the measurement tools to do that. Now, there are a number of things that make it difficult in the questions that have been raised, not to answer, but make it difficult to respond to the issue that was raised about this current state of affairs. We have a government that year in and year out returns money to the national treasury. Finance year in and year out go to go to Parliament. They unveil the budget for that financial year. It goes to departments. Departments are unable to spend this money. When they are the very ones that have said they need this money. Now, when that money is not spent, it speaks to the current state of affairs within public service, where there is an ability to plan effectively, to implement effectively, to spend the budget as has been allocated, but also to monitor and evaluate the implementation of programs and plans and the expenditure of budget, accountability, and last, consequence management. Those are the problems that we experience. That's the current state of affairs. We have money, we can't make it a scapegoat to Atlanta. No matter what, we still don't spend it. It goes back to the national treasury. And I was saying to the DG earlier on that on slide 23, I'm not sure if you're able to go to slide 23. Slide 23 speaks to the number of vacancies that exist. The issue that the DG did not handle is whether or not those vacancies are funded. And the question that would continue from that question about whether or not the vacancies are funded is, how did we even get to a point where the vacancies are no longer funded? And the answer again comes to the state of affairs, the capacity to implement, the capacity to plan for recruitment on time. Then you sit with vacant posts for about 10 years, and then you hope Minister Kotowan is not going to take that money away from you as a department. It is our managers in the public service that are responsible for the state of affairs. Because some of the time it becomes difficult for us as ministers to say speed up the process. And I will give an example of my department. Recruiting just one person for the DM's office becomes a major nightmare. And I don't think it is only my department. I am sure that other ministers who are in this room will also say the same thing. That yes, as I'm a DG, Nabantu Baba, HR, they make it so difficult for us to fill these vacancies timelessly so that we don't end up giving money back to Minister Ogomo. So that capacity in the current state of affairs speaks to those things. The issue of policing, and please, it's not me answering, I've already responded to the Human Rights Commission. But again, what I find very interesting is that the police will tell you about shortage of personnel. They will tell you about shortage of equipment and all of those things. Minister of Finance, the police understand by 2.6 billion on visible 4.2. Okay, on visible policing. Visible policing was 2.6, and the rest of their budget they underspent by 4.1, as Minister correctly says. No, guys, what do you call that? If it does not bother on criminality, what is it? What do you call it? When our people get murdered and raped every day, how do you justify this under expenditure? And because I want us to come out of this summit very pragmatic on what it is that we need to put in place to ensure that the current state of affairs does not remain the status quo. We should be looking forward and looking towards planning for a better government, for a better service, and also for a better South Africa. Coming back to the issue of ICT expenditure, we piloted, I think I joined in 2010 as Deputy Minister. DG is laughing because she didn't want to talk about this. I became Deputy Minister of Public Service and Administration in 2010. In the same year, in 2010, we launched the piloting of the IFMS. 12 years later, we are still piloting. And the net effect of that is over and above the fact that it's wasteful expenditure. It is also curtailing our own efforts in dealing with systems for recruitment. Because of the high rate of unemployment, if you advertise a job for a DDG, you will even get a traffic officer who has got a matric applying for that job, or a manager at pet stores. Because of the high rate of unemployment, all and sundry will apply for a job that they know they will not qualify for. But the process of sifting through all of those CVs could have been made better if we could have quickly moved away from IFMS and got our own system, HR, M&D systems, so that we're able to recruit and the process is quicker and the process is more accurate. Minister, where finance might come here and raise me on that one. But I think I agree. The INFS has really been a problem. But over and above that, our office, Minister will acknowledge where we are wrong as DPSA. We are responsible because our department is the office of the Government Chief Information Officer. From the time of IFMS and before, we still have not put up a slide, which was correct. But with all of the problems that are outlined by the DG on ICT, systems and infrastructure, and legacy projects for that matter, we still have not done an ICT audit in the public service to determine what works and what does not work. But what we do year in and year out is buy equipment that gets obsolete, unspent, and it doesn't appear on the Auditor General as wasteful and irregular expenditure. So there are these many problems that we need to look at. So the GCIO, the Government Chief Information Officer, is going to embark together with the EGTOC, who are responsible for ICT in the public service. They are going to embark on an exercise of auditing all systems in government to determine whether they are useful or they are not useful. For those that are not useful, guys, let's cut our losses and move on. Because that's what makes it difficult when we come here and December always stands up and talks about the cost of spending on goods and services, which is correct. How then do we justify everything that we say to employees when we are also not prudent with the utilization of money that the Minister of Finance has given us to be custodians of? So the issue that I was talking about the capacity issues of assessment, determining the problem statement, and working forward from there, which is going to be sitting tomorrow, will address most of the issues that we're talking about here. Work has begun, but work has to be speeded up, so that we're able to convince each and every one of you through facts, not innuendo or suspicion or what we just like to say, through fact, that this is what we're putting in place as systems that will enable us to cut all of these unnecessary costs, which might in the end look better instead of Minister saying 10 billion for compensation of employees and stuff like that. You could even say 12 billion because we have saved costs through the rationalization after our audit on ICT and other expenditure items. I'm not saying anything. But when we start doing our work of cutting those costs that are not necessary, we will then start seeing more money remaining in your pockets and for you to make better informed decisions based on the fact that you can back those decisions financially.
with my right way. However, I knew that the minister was going to cater for your questions before you ask them. But therefore, I'm going to give over to the DG to wrap up. Thank you.
I think that minister has done a lot for me. On the sub-question, I just want to say, I think that you must also assist us to look at wastage and subs. And lots of ICT investment in subs that do not yield any outcomes. Let's collaborate, let's work together to unpack the wastage in subs. I used to work at Community Safety in Gauteng. I have lots of inside information about wastage that happens at subs generally as an entity. So let's look at that and see how we can collaborate around it. And I think that there is space to invest in ICT capability in subs, so that the police who are foot soldiers on the streets are supported through ICT capabilities by people who can be in control rooms and look at what's happening in our communities and in some of the hotspots of crime. On the issue around negotiations, certainly I didn't bring the issues here to be negotiated or to be, I didn't use the back door, but my understanding was that we have engagements here, so I was just putting on the table some of the issues without removing them from the agenda of the KCPC as issues that were I'm in agreement with the committee to spoke on that particular issue and your views around it. And then there's an issue around an elephant in the room, which is goods and services. The assumption is always that goods and services are in the interest of improving service delivery. So if indeed these goods and services are done in the interest of improving service delivery, I think that it is understandable that they are higher. But if we are besieged with the challenges of irregular expenditure, fruitless expenditure, it means some of what we are spending on in a way goes to wastage, and we should continuously look at that particular issue. There's a question about the fixed establishment. So the report that I presented to you is from Q3, so it covered up to December last year. We will pull out the stats again now, end of March, which is end of Q4 in the financial year. And this is data that is on PESA. So it's the approved structures, and we get the information against the approved structures. Because once the department structure is approved, it's populated on PESA, and we track implementation and the filling of vacancies accordingly. So those positions that are created, that are still in the head, that are still being strategized, planned, they are not yet on PESA yet, and we do not know about them. And I agree with you that things have moved and changed in some departments, and it may not be a true reflection of what we have on PESA, but our source of data remains PESA at this stage. I think Minister answered the issue of lifestyle audits. The only thing I want to say is that my understanding of the public service is there's no politician in the public service who can do corruption without cooperation of public servants. The systems are such that there's no way, even if my minister wants to do it, if I do not collaborate, if people who are below me do not collaborate, she's not going to be able to do it. So we as public servants have a responsibility to say no and advise our ministers at times if they are the ones who are pushing people. And even they must advise us as teachers and other people if we are the ones who are pushing people to engage in corruption. As an example, there's no corruption that can happen in the public service without the involvement of the public servant. Our supply chain processes, our HR processes, you would need that collaboration of the public servant to do that. I do think that we must jointly with Labour develop a program to implement the public service charter. We must collaborate and see what are the things that are implementable, what are the things that are not implementable, and start doing something around it. Otherwise, what's the point of us agreeing on the public service charter and just throwing it away like that? I do think that we must find each other on this particular issue and commit on certain deliverables on both sides. We have certain challenges, you have certain challenges, we understand, but let's find each other and commit on certain things, even if it's two things, that at the end of the financial year, we can say these things were done very successfully jointly as they and government. I would really want to present that as an issue that I would like the conference to look at. Vacancies, yes, my bosses cry all the time, and I guess all teachers have the same challenge of bosses. You know, the flip side of this is that actually that recruitment is guided by regulations and policy directives, and they are signed by MPSA. So, the previous MPSAs locked this one into those regulations, but now they are not working for the current system in place, which is why we are revising them to accommodate some level of flexibility and moving quickly on some of the things that we have to do. So we've had that, Minister, and we're doing some work around it. The last issue around, I think the instruction issue, the GCI was there, please raise your hand so that people can see you, or maybe you can just stand up so that they see you when they are looking for you. So Minister has instructed, thank you, Madam. Minister has instructed very specifically what needs to be done, the audit, the full audit of IT capability, the systems that we have in government. I think we should cooperate with GTOP and CITA and other players and just do this thing once and for all. And I know it's difficult because some of the departments are closing in, they don't want us to enter and understand what's going on. But from a government's perspective, we must do it. Chairperson, I just want to say thank you for your kindness and for your support throughout this process. It was not easy to come on stage. I couldn't eat lunch because I was worried. I was praying in my own way because I was quite when they took it, but it's done now. Thank you very much. And I will see what happens.
As Program Director, I think my task as a chairperson of Plenary number 1 is now done. Minister Goronwan, your patience, I really appreciate it, but your time is arrived. I'm giving over to my colleagues to take us through the program.
Thank you very much, Chair. And can we give a big round of applause to all the presenters and ourselves who participated in this session? And may I please make a request that ministers and the leadership present here, can you allow me to alter the program and allow us to change the spare wheel while the car is in motion, so that we don't break for tea, and then we'll keep on taking tea as well when we continue the session and so on, without being disruptive to the session. Because I can see the Minister of Finance really want to come and share with us here. But then let me call upon the chairperson of this session, who will usher in the Minister of Finance, Chairperson, Advocate Bono, who will be taking us through this session, which will be then presented by the Minister of Finance. As we already Advocate Bono come in, Chair, he's the one who will be steering in the Plenary 2 that will be addressed by the Minister of Finance. A big round of applause for Advocate Bono as the Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon.
Thank you. My job is very easy. I am going to be facilitating this session, chairing it, and therefore my duty is just to call upon Minister Kodowana who has been ready. Minister Kodowana, if you could come up. Once you come up, I think I need to remind you that in the budget speech, you indicated the state is committed to control those parts of the budget that are permanent in nature, including arresting the historical rapid increase in the public sector wage. I think the audience is interested in unpacking that.
Manda, I'm a bit disappointed. I thought you were going to give us as number. I'm a bit disappointed. The leader of the government delegation, Minister Rodo, colleagues, Minister Mtwale, the DMs, leaders of the labor movement that are here, or General Secretary and President, and fellow delegates. I was anxious because I thought time is running out. I thought I was going to start at 12:30 so that I should have time to debate. And makes a few points because I'm told this question and answers. So that I should have time to have an engagement. If chairperson and delegates are happen to touch on what some people have said are part of the bargaining process, it will not be intentional. I don't intend to bargain myself. I regard this as a strategic session. Let me just on the operational matters say to DG Mankasi, and Minister Brown, when IFMS, we had a meeting as ministers and DG, my recollection, Minister Brown. We then said, this thing has been going on for ages. And the Minister of Communication and Digital Communication said, look, CETA has got alternative proposals. Because where I stand, I was saying to somebody, if you have got an IT system, there will be differences. Environment may want to have a system that captures their animals in some part. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in their system interacting with performance and financial management. So as long as you can develop your own system which integrates with ours, can report properly. That's what, in my view, unfortunately, then I've got no vested interest. I'm not a bureaucrat or treasurer. So I may have those, but we have got, from where I sit, we're still waiting for that. Let me just, for the purpose of this discussion, recap what we said in the budget. The first thing we did was outline where the economy is. It's quite critical in understanding of that because it impacts on the revenue base we have. Slight numbers have changed since then. The actual numbers for 2021, as you are aware, is 4.9, a growth of 1.2 in the last quarter. Huge performance by consumption expenditure, largely as a result of two things, by the way. That's one on my assessment. If you look at that expenditure, largely hotels, restaurants, and so on, which shows the impact of the easing of lockdown regulations. That's the first thing, the impact of easing of lockdown regulations is beginning to see a proper economic activity. But secondly, is just last year, the Reserve Bank did some progressive work in terms of in fact that they have reduced a lot of interest rate. You're seeing people begin to take more credit and do economics. So we're beginning to see an economy picking up. But we are likely to see a reversal of those things. Okay. So the bargaining around in game we're going to be getting in, it's going to be a bit tough. So we're going to see a reversal of that. You can see the Reserve Bank for 2 meetings now, they've increased the interest rate by 50 basis points. It's going to begin to bite, and we've seen most of the people not taking more credit in consumption, impacting on consumption expenditure. So, it's a worry. What complicates matters at a global level is the Ukraine-Russian problem. As Ukraine, our trade with Ukraine, with Russia, for instance, is small. Of our total trade, Russia's trade with us as a percentage of our total trade is 0.5%. They're like 0.5%. Ukraine is a 0.04. But there are specific products which are critical for that. For instance, we import the bulk of our wheat from those 2 countries. We also export largely citrus fruit, particularly from the Sanders River in the Eastern Cape to those areas. So you're likely to see an impact on those things. So, but the more worrying things is the inflationary aspect. First is an energy cost. Okay, energy cost. Even now, I'm not taking Minister Mandasha's call. I'm trying to avoid him the board meeting, so he's more concerned about how do we cushion the impact. How do we cushion the impact? We may have to, at least for 2 months, look at how do we cushion that impact. I was asking the Deputy General Secretary of NEHAL, can I take it from what I put forward for an increase for public service? Take a portion of that. He nearly killed me. So we're going to see that, which is likely to have inflation and increased energy prices. The increase of energy prices, the problem with them, per basis, the impact on food prices, the impact on everything else. So we're still going to see that. There's a positive side to this thing. Commodity prices are booming. And as South Africa, we're part of the commodity producers. But here's the trick. You can't get product to the port. Last year, the port of Durban, of Richards Bay, takes about 78 million tons of coal. Last year, we only pushed through 56 million. So, the balance, if we push the whole thing, giving them another revenue for the country about 70 billion rand, 20 billion rand, would have come handy for me to be able to increase better salaries. I didn't get that revenue. But let me just say another thing, some other things we said there. We said if you look at the budget that we presented, 59.4% of that budget was largely toward the social wage. But that is what the social wage. As we sit, and some of it is going through, we've extended the SRD grant for another 12 months. Right? For another 12 months, which is another 44 billion. What that means, no one in South Africa who's poor is not touched by this government. No. So, was again the commodity prices, because we were able to generate an additional 182 billion dollars. But what we did not know, by the time we came to the end of the financial year, we had already consumed part of that, because the unrest in Gauteng and KZN, we had to do a special adjustment of 70 billion. So we were able to also provide tax relief. We didn't increase, for instance, the fuel tax, which this increase now is damaging what we're trying to do to provide relief to South Africans. So that in itself is a positive aspect we're trying to say. We don't touch much on the growth numbers, on the growth outlook and the global outlook. I did mention that. But I must say, despite all of this, we must be on course from a fiscal strategy perspective. From a fiscal strategy perspective, we must be on course. What do I mean by that? Our debt to GDP ratio has got to be controlled. It's not that a fancy issue that we're trying to achieve by doing that. It's not a fancy issue. I'm going to say later and show you the figures, how bad this thing is going to be over time if we don't control it. Because over the years, we've seen a growth in expenditure and a reduction in revenue. That service costs are rising as a percentage of GDP. Now, to give you an example, in the budget in 2008-2009, your debt was 657 billion. 2015-2016, it was already hitting 2 trillion. We expect this year, by the time we close this financial year, to have hit a 4.3 trillion debt. Now, that increases your borrowing requirement. I'm just saying, when you go and borrow, you're going to borrow 3 things. When you go and borrow 3 things. The first thing is that when you present the budget, you say, this is the amount I'm going to spend, this is the revenue I'm going to collect. If you look at all that budget, there's always a gap between the expenditure and the revenue. That's the deficit. So I must go and borrow that now. But in addition to that, I have this debt redemption that is coming, which I promise I must pay. I must also service old debt. So the overall borrowing requirement is growing. By the next year, the borrowing requirement will be close to 500 billion. That's counting out all other expenditure. It is bigger than Home Affairs, Defense, Police, and other security classes combined. All of them combined are less than what we owe. Can be right. Can be right. So we've got to change that a bit. Change that. Let me just take you here. You've been talking about frontline department. I'm a fan of frontline department. Let me tell you that. Okay? I'm a fan of frontline department. What has happened over the years, which policy choices easy to accuse Treasury, right? Treasury does not make policy choices. Government make policy choices. And when those policy choices are made, Treasury is going to stand up to finance. Government has said this finance. Let me just give you an example. 2013 to today, let me start before 2013. It's my favorite topic, ESCOM. My favorite topic. ESCOM, 2008, started the outage, right? It's 14 years now. What we've done, policy choices, government is back up. I take responsibility for that, but it's bad decision. We've taken a decision that we spend most of our effort fixing ESCOM, not fixing power to the grid. And as a result, even today, you're not guaranteed that you're not going to have an outage. Because we've not invested in getting more electricity to the grid. What we've done from 2013, we've put more money, taken all the money from all these departments. From 2013 to date, we've been taking money from 9 departments. ESCOM are only beneficiary of 200 billion rand. Not 200 million. 200 billion rand going to ESCOM. In the next years, ESCOM is going to get 88 billion rand. Are we closer to solving ESCOM? No. The SIR, Mr. President, CSIR has done a study of the damage done by ESCOM from 2019 to 2021. 338 billion rand to this economy, but 35% of that last year alone, which means a point improvement. So we're making policy choices. What are those policy choices, implications of that policy choices? Let me use the police because everyone has spoken about the police. The police have lost between those 2 years 63.9 billion. Taken from the police. Forget about this non-expenditure. Now about eyes on you. That's a different story. That's a different story. Right? State-owned enterprises, grants. Let's agree. We also got a lot of more than inflation increases. Right? Not run away from that. So all of that combined. But then what that means was squeezed the frontline departments. Squeezed the frontline departments. You know, I was in December at Frontline Hospital in Queenstown. So this sister says to me, you know, we've upgraded this section in the hospital. So we need about 150 nurses, but we can't because we've been told the posts for nurses have been freezed. Now, if you ask me, I'm more than happy in a discussion about how do we make sure that we can fund critical costs. That discussion and discourse we need to do, and what is our understanding of those critical costs? And what are the trade-offs? We will have to be trade-offs. What are the trade-offs? So, I was addressing the police on Friday, and I didn't mention this 4.1 billion minister, and then she says, why did you mention it? I know, I sympathize with it. You know, how it works is so problematic. I discovered even I'm able to tell that the too inclusive in departments. No. The PFMA was designed for allow managers to manage. That's what it was designed to do. Now, our police sympathize with them. Don't spend 4.1 billion because public works won't give them delegation to be able to do whatever they were supposed to do. CETA won't do the ICT. All of these things, other departments impact on others from working. The new procurement bill is going to make sure that all of those roadblocks are blocked. Each accounting officer must be able to manage his or her budget and be held accountable and consequence management. So if you ask us, when I talk about the wage bill, which almost writing the line then, let me get into that controversial subject. I talk about it in rands and cents in terms of its composition of total expenditure. Now, do I agree with the headcount debate at all? I'll come back to it. I'm talking about in terms of rands and cents as a percentage of expenditure. As we speak, in every rand that I collect, 31 cents goes into the budget. The second biggest items are grants. That takes me 45 cents of 46 cents total. Before I could do anything, I still got to have this debt to settle. So, in terms of the numbers, as a result, only 9 cents is left for capital expenditure. Only 9 cents is left for capital expenditure. Now, I'm not in any way trying to suggest that the issue is headcount. I'm going to come back to this story. I'm not in any way trying to suggest that this issue is headcount, but I'm trying to say, as a percentage of budget, how does it look like? How does it look like? Again, if you look at the increase in headcount, it costs us about 53 billion. But what was increasing was unit cost, 181 billion. Now, I'm indication that our restaurants and president will always deal. And I'm not pronouncing anything for now. I'm just saying now there was 36 billion. There's some interesting statistics what I want to share with you. It is against you, but it also supports you. Let me check with the bad news for you and come up with the good news. The bad news is, it was done in 2019 by OECD. They say, as a percentage of GDP, compare the number of countries in the OECD, South Africa, in terms of the percentage of GDP, were number 3 in terms of wage pay. Second to Denmark and Norway. Right? But they say something interesting. They say something interesting. But if you look as a percentage of population, South Africa is far behind, which means we've got lesser public service than other countries. So our head count is not the issue. Right? Our head count is not the issue. So I'm raising these issues because we need to be talking together, moving, as how do we restructure this public service to reflect this equity in terms of headcount, but without impacting negatively on the wage bill. We need to discuss that. For instance, I'm still arguing that I cannot take, when I looked at one hospital that said we need 150 nurses, you can imagine all hospitals combined, how many nurses do we need? Right? When I read in a newspaper, there are people marching, doctors were saying, we don't have money to extend that contract when we need doctors. Those things, don't think that I'm sitting as the Minister of Finance as a crude individual who has got no pain, who does not feel that pain. We do. But let's have a conversation. What are the critical skills in health? What are the critical skills in the education? We have medicine teachers, maths and science teachers. Do we have engineers? You know, my first meeting of disaster in Plenary, I went to this meeting. They report to us, oh, the same stuff we read in newspapers. I was asking the question, people were surprised, I felt I'm new. By the way, the same chairman, the newcomer in 8 months, okay? In the 8 months, in a cohash to me. So I go into this meeting. We talk about disasters, but this is stuff we read in newspapers. What we should have done is to send engineers on the ground so that this report must tell us what has to be done. Now, there are no sufficient engineers in the system, and so on and so on. So, there has to be a debate around these issues. If you look at spending over the next 2 years, learning and culture will get 1.3 trillion over the next 3 years, MTO. Social development, which includes grants, is 1 trillion. Debt service cost, 1 trillion. Can be right. So, health will be 300 billion less than debt service cost. Peace and stability, almost half of debt service cost. Sooner or later, then, people don't take this, we must take that serious. It's like yourself, if you don't pay your bill, somebody one day will repossess it. Now, in government, it happens in a different way. Is when you cannot service your debt, then you've got to go to the IMF. If you can. When people start withdrawing their money, you've got to go to the IMF. When you go to the IMF, not on your terms, it's like somebody else across your car. You will not be able to, you lose your own sovereignty as a state. Something over the years of jealousy that will refuse to do. So, moving forward, we need to be, I said I'm going to summarize because I want to get some few questions and debate now. We need to do a meeting. I was saying to someone who can get to a meeting with you and you employer and think that you're going to come out of that meeting without bruises. Isn't the nature of that interaction? Being an employer must be used to that. I'm that kind of an employer. You don't want. I was saying to General Secretary of Minnesota, don't worry, I'll be around until you conclude this negotiation. I'm going to be next to you. Then we come to this issue. I'm summarizing those issues that get up to questions. Then we come to this issue of the pension reforms. Pension reforms. Government has put forward what's called a two-pot system. In other words, your contribution will be twofold. A permanent, a pension, a retirement component, and a cash withdrawal component. That's the consultation in the paper which was published, a consultation in this. So, the proposed legislation, which is going to come out soon, as I've indicated, that proposed legislation is going to allow for a withdrawal. We're going to move quickly in doing this. It's going to allow for withdrawal. But I've made it clear, it's not going to be trade that will make a decision. A lot of pension funds are over the place. All right? You make that decision, oh, people must withdraw, you don't know how sustainable that fund. And it collapses tomorrow, whatever understand pension fund, no. Your pension fund, your trustees must make the decision on the basis of the sustainability of that fund. Okay? So, that's what's going to happen. The challenge is your pension not under the Pension Act. Your pension is not under the Pension Act. So if we want to do this thing, we have to do two things simultaneously. To put it into the Pensions Act, and so that it should conform with all other procedures. So, challenges we need to discuss: how frequently should people withdraw? What is going to be the tax treatment of those withdrawals? What is going to be impact on the retirement annuity and defined benefits? And also liquidity implications. So I'm summarizing because I want some time into fluent manner. So let me just tell you the following. If anyone thinks that this government is not committed to collective bargaining, I want to assure you today that this government is committed to collective bargaining. Let's agree on that. Let's disagree on the modalities and the legals. We are committed. Let's have a discussion about modalities and so on. There's the issue of, in government, in government, sometimes we make mistakes which also impact on third parties. Okay? You make mistakes on third parties. If the Minister of Public Administration negotiates, there must be an assumption from unions that he's negotiating on behalf of all government. So the disjuncture in government sometimes can create problems with third parties, which is unfortunate. Let me just give you one of the challenges I'm facing now. 2 years ago, there was a negotiation with the sugar industry that as part of the master plan, we're not going to raise the tax for 3 years. There's figure like 5 tax, then 2 ministers come to me, no, this is what the agreement we said. I said, but why is my department party to this thing because they don't want to do it? Now, it turns out, although they never said they are not party to the agreement, they tacitly gave the impression that they are going to not have an objection. Yeah? So I can't fault those ministers as a result of it, because we did not raise an objection at the time. Because they themselves created an impression that they are talking on behalf of all of government. Now, what has happened in this instance with the public sector, which I think is our own fault, our battles in government spilled over and impacted on the collective bargaining. And the impact on collective bargaining, it does not then translate that as government we're not committed to collective bargaining. We are. We want to reassure you that we will be in negotiation with you genuinely and seriously. Then to work in the line, I went to a meeting of a minister, preliminary meeting. But Minister of Finance is here now. The only time we see Minister of Finance is when he attaches a number in February. I said, okay. Look here, let's have this. I don't want to attach number, but all of you, in February 23, 24, 27, any of those 3 days, any year, Minister of Finance don't take the budget. It's known. Then why, instead of you attaching a number which is not agreed, what we need to be discussing is an alignment when we start the negotiation. I want to know, this is a negotiator in April. Send a touch now. getting angry. It's a foregone conclusion, and so on and so on. I don't like to have a foregone conclusion, but for God's sake, can we negotiate on time? Eh? Brother, for God's sake, can we negotiate on time so that whatever number attached there is a number which reflects the conversation of the negotiation process? Yeah? So that's going to my plea as I'm going to sit down here. I've not dealt with everything. I've just highlighted because I want some time, but I'm ready for it. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. It's now time for questions. The other thing you could do, backtrack in a while. Ladies and gentlemen, we can take questions and we'll take them in groups of 3. Start. Right? I don't have a question. I want just to correct something, Chair, so that this meeting must not be, particularly the last input of the minister, that it is only now that government, particularly through the minister, wants to realign the negotiations with budget. You know very well, Chair, you're the chair of the PCPC. When we signed an agreement in 2012 and do exactly that, it's an existing policy. That's the reason why Labour was coerced to sign a 3-year agreement, because government convinced Labour that the budgeting cycle is an LTF, it's a 3-year cycle. We never wanted a 1-year term. The reason we did a 3-year term is because we were trying to come closer to the government to align the negotiations with the budget. So this thing that says after the summit, and the fact that the minister has already attached the figure, attaching that figure was in violation of the already existing collective agreement. That says that shall not happen. That's why I wanted to correct it. It's not a question.
Thanks, Mike. Questions? DJS?
Thank you. Firstly, just to make the point that for you who are chairing, you might not see us this side, but we are also part of the summit. We have ideas. Because even in the previous session, we had questions, and you did not recognize us. We nearly thought that we must leave because you might not have interest in the good ideas that we have. Look, thanks for the input by the minister. The first question I just want to get is adequate to this point. We spoke about the developmental state. So, according to you, Minister, do you think that a low morale in terms of your public servants is good for economic development? Can you rely on an unhappy, dissatisfied public servant? A public servant who can't make ends meet, who struggles just a day after receiving his or her salary. Can you rely on such a public servant to build a developmental state? And can you also rely on such a public servant for economic development? That's the first question. The second question. Almost almost linked to the first one. Can you rely on public servants whose salaries or conditions of service are not improving for economic development? It's just something different. I'm asking it differently. If you don't improve their salaries and they can't spend, don't you think that that might affect the growth of our economy? Because if they need to spend, there must be circulation of money in the economy to influence growth of the economy. That's the second one, Chair. The last one. I want to know the attitude of the minister on this idea of the government employee housing scheme. Am I correct to believe that government is very slow to respond to this demand of the establishment of a government employee housing scheme? Because government does not want to offend the commercial banks. Because for a long time now, that space, that market, the hegemony there has always been the commercial banks. And therefore, of course, when we introduce this government employee housing scheme, the rules will change. That space will change. The difficult rules applied by the commercial banks, when they want us to pay for 20 years, will change. When they charge us interest rate as they wish to, for profit maximization will change. So am I correct, Minister, to say that you are slow? I know the current Minister of TPSA has some passion around that. But she must rely on government and your department in particular to realize this government employee housing scheme. Why are you afraid of the commercial banks? In fact, in our country, there is this thing that we talk at times, some people just undermine it, of radical economic transformation. Some of us hold the view that this could be that radical economic transformation, one of those attempts of radical economic transformation, where at least that market, commercial banks, will be challenged moving forward. The minister spoke about making a comparison in terms of salaries of Sweden and Denmark, if I'm not mistaken. That's my last point. Well, I have not seen the document. I would be interested to see that document. The interest I have in the comparison is that it's the total and it's an absolute comparison based on the variables that such a wage bill can afford. Because all workers work because they need to afford some variables. Amongst those variables will be housing, will be education for yourself, self-development, and to afford education for your children. Health for yourself and for your children. Transport and to feed, which is the last variable. So those teachers in Sweden and the teachers in Denmark are experiencing the same challenges in terms of affording the variables that I'm talking about. At least I can talk about the South Africans. They don't have houses. They're staying at home. They don't have their own houses. They can't afford education for their children. They're excluded from NSFAS. They can't afford healthcare, and so on and so forth. So when you make these comparisons, at times it's good to look at the total picture before embracing and accepting them as good comparison. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Carter. We have noted the issues, and my apologies if previously the left-hand side was not noted. Mr. Carter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for granting the left-hand side another opportunity. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask two questions to the Minister, and I'm quoting directly from the budget speech because we don't understand what is meant there. On page 10, the quote is, in this budget we are adding 24.6 billion for provincial education departments to address the shortfalls in the compensation of teachers. We would like to know what is meant by that. And then on page 11, there's a reference to the increase
introduced in the public service wage bill that will increase by 1.8% per annum. And the question is, are we now looking at a 1.8% increase in the public sector wages? And if that is the case, I want to link up with what my colleague Mr. Delobe has said, that is, how can we expect public servants to be satisfied with a below inflation rate increase? Just those two questions for further clarity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Booker. We're noting the questions, DGS. Mr. Mafuso.
So thanks, Chair. Firstly, Minister, I think we need to agree that the definition of public service is not always the same in different countries. For instance, there are countries where someone is not, as an example, not counted as part of the public service, or railway services and so on. So to compare South Africa, you must compare a cabbage with a cabbage. Because this thing that South Africa is in the top 3, if you compare with the rest of the countries, might be misleading. Now, the second thing is that perhaps it will be good to hear from the minister. What exactly? I am returning to this question of goods and services, because that's where the biggest mistake is. What are you going to do to contain the cost of contracting up on the goods and services? Part of the problem is that even if you have a fully fledged unit in a department, like communications, I want to make an example about digital vibe standard, that you have a fully fledged communication unit. People who are supposed to perform the work that they outsource. You have legal departments, so people who are called advocates, lawyers in departments, fully fledged legal. But all they do is tendering out to private law firms. What is the plan to deal with issues? In the same way, you have applied a clear plan targeting public servants, wages. Thank you.
Thank you. I've noted the reason. Manuel going to the microphone, and then I'll come to you. So I'm supposed to chair a session where December promotes that I must not get briefs from the state. Reason?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, when the General Secretary of the PSCBC started talking, he mentioned specifically the growing missing middle. And I think my colleagues have alluded to this. How do these people sitting here, who are funding their children at universities, their children don't qualify for NSFAS and etc., how do they possibly afford that without the concomitant increase in salary? It can't be stagnant when we are in fact the people who are assisting the economy by paying for our children. And then the very children face the problem in the workplace where they are not on the top of the list because the bursary holders must get in first. I go to the second one because I'm a person of brevity. I won't give a long speech first. Minister, what was the promised good news? You said there was bad news and there was good news. Now we heard the bad news. I'm battling to find the good news. I hope it wasn't the pension story. Thank you.
Thank you, Basil. Yes, come on.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Appreciating what the leadership has engaged on. been taken from what the minister has placed before us. One of the first things that we picked up was that there were some internal processes within government itself that resulted in where we are now. But when I was doing Standard 5, I was taught how to manage the risk. They said there were about 4 elements. And one of those was either you manage by avoiding, or by absorbing it, or transferring it. Now the question is, why would the contradictory internal processes of government in managing a signed agreement result in the third party taking the hit for it, and not the very internal? So what it says that this government transferred the risk to us as workers. Why is that? And when the ministers indicated that they are aware of that anomaly. The second element, which is a question, is on the balancing act. Was in the articulation, there was an articulation around revenue versus spending. And I think it is common cause that part of the establishment was that the collection is low. And the allocation of those revenue, of the revenue that is collected. There's one critical point that we've always raised to say, close the links. So year in, year out, when we listen to budget, we listen to an improper balancing of both the revenue that is collected and the spending. And yet the links are not closed. To what extent are we going to go with this record of getting the story that is unbalanced? Because much of it comes to the notion that we'll go out and borrow. And the reality is that within the context of continuous borrowing, where we do not intend that, the question is it because of the capacity of the state, or is it because of a platform that is created? I just took an example about one story in one country, where they perpetually make sure that there's no power. Because the key people that are benefiting out of the powerless entity, who are running the gases and other things, are benefiting more than what the ordinary citizens would get the power. The last question is that, to what extent is Treasury willing to buy, in this regard, I'm using the word Treasury clearly, to what extent is Treasury willing to buy a social contract for workers, given the outcome of the court? Because, I mean, the fact that there was a figure attached. To us, we want to go deeper into the element. It's not about the figure, but it's about us getting the trust back. Because, I mean, the trust deficit, there's a serious trust deficit. To what extent is government willing to buy that social contract for us to engage them forward?
Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director, and the team to Minister and to everyone in this gathering. Of course, we welcome the explanation of the Minister and all the narrative that goes with it. And we acknowledge actually the scapegoat pandemic that is everywhere. I just want to check with the Minister. Will Treasury now be part of the bargaining process? Why I'm asking this? If we have ministers mandated to represent the government, decisions are made, resolutions signed. Now there comes Treasury complaining that I was not actually consulted. Then the matter is taken to the court. If it is in the court, yes, of course, the highest court in the land will rule, no, the Treasury was not consulted. Therefore, that's why we need to know from now onwards what is the status quo. Honorable Minister, the Minister said this government is committed to collective bargaining. Now, the proof of pudding is in the eating. Is this evident in the actions of your department in particular, when the collective agreement has been signed, then you go to court, not to the chamber, to take further discussions, but to challenge it in the court. It is safe for our own democracy in as far as labor is concerned. Or we're going back to pre-1994, where such democratic practice could have been made better, but prohibited by circumstances of the time. Minister, we are government employees. We have the life to live. We have our own dependents. An increase in a salary of one government employee, it means an increase in the living standard of those dependents. Since this has been now taken away, directly or indirectly, are we hoping for the better service to those employees in the sector or in different sectors? There is one point. Mr. Baisdale has taken a point on NSFAS. I will not repeat it. But as government employees, we do not benefit, but we pay taxes. Will there be any way you adjust, relax those NSFAS rules that prevent our own learners, our own kids, from benefiting? I'm posing to you as a challenge. And the last point is, Minister, are you eyeing maybe borrowing money from GPEF so that you can make up for what is happening in the state? Thank you, Honorable Minister.
Thanks. I don't see any hands.
Can I shoot? Oh, I'm just a bit shorter, but there's a mic. Unfortunately, it's just put next to this pole, so you have
Sure. No, that's fine. Please try and be brief. Thank you.
I will not be bullied like that. No, but thank you very much for the opportunity. I see your hand ended. I think, thank you, Minister, for your maiden presentation to this platform, which was mainly characterized by, I would call it grievances, or in the main, the whole speech was problematization of the problem of the country, nothing else. And I think that's why Basil would have said, what is the positive we can take out of it? So the question is to invite you to at least give us some green light beside the problematization areas that you have dealt with in the entire speech. Can you share with us here at least a green light that you have your hands on the ball and something would be done to change? Nevertheless, on the other question, it's to poke your emotions so that I don't, or to poke your honest and sincerity to respond so that I don't get out of here with emotions running high that you also don't care. On the question of the agreement that was signed by Minister Ayanda, who was here today, who came back after it was disputed that it doesn't exist or it's given by Treasury. How do you personally feel now that there's a Concord ruling on the matter? Just to, well, I am talking your deep emotional part to tell us how you sincerely feel about this part. Lastly, Minister, would you share with us if you do think that should we be having a state bank, it could have, or do you think it could have any role in easing the burden that the public servants are feeling, and in particular, in general, the population in our country, but also the role in which a state bank would play in economic growth or recovery, as it were. I'm inviting you to enter into that discussion. Thank you very much, Chair. And I apologize for not taking your instruction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair.
Oh, yes. Must take the chair if you're not as tall as I am. Okay, that's the last question I'm taking.
Well, I thought spectators will help. I see they don't help.
Yes, he's
Yeah. Thank you. Honorable Minister, you spoke about this huge debt that is growing, which then at the ultimate end becomes a kind of entertainment in terms of what government employees can get and trying to manage the wage bill. I want to say that when I listen to I don't want to call it complaints, let me rather say the challenges that you raise. I listened attentively, and I wanted to hear you talking about the issue of corruption, the leakage in the system that is happening on your watch. You correctly refer to yourself as a treasure. Where I come from, in treasure of a burial society, you have to account when the money is disappearing in this area. So I want to say, this borrowing that we are having, Minister, we have a problem because we are watching that you are borrowing to steal, go back and borrowing to steal. And I want to check, what is your department really doing to make sure that this stealing is dealt with so that money can be used for right things? And the last part, if you are serious about this wage bill, and have you considered the issue of tender system and outsourcing? Because it's a fact that what we can buy for 5 rand, we buy for 25 rand. I heard you talking about the 1 rand and the 31 cents. And if we can then check out of that, the very 9 cents you are talking about, what you should be buying with 3 cents to buy it with 7 cents. So that's where the problem is. The last one, maybe if I may be controversial, in trying to deal with this entire budget, will we ever hear this government doing away with the deputy ministers? Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Minister.
And this is the last question. Thank you. Thanks. Louis from one of the biggest union, PSA. My question is simple. I want the minister to touch base on the conditions of the IMF loan. And he's aware that he's one of the first ministers since 1994 that went to borrow in the IMF. The last one is around the issues of the vacancies. You know, we talk about these things now and again. You allocate budget to department to create jobs, but jobs are not created. The very same government that talk about a decent job, talk about creating 1 million jobs. I want to know what exactly you actually plan, because I believe that, Minister, you are not new within the economic policy sector, because from the other world, you have been leading that economic committee for more than 10 years. It is for this reason that we say we must stop speech now and ensure that we fill these vacancies. In KwaZulu-Natal, we've got shortage of nurses. Home affairs, there are long queues. You've got one of the hospitals that has not been opened, Dr. Pisika Isaiah said, where we have spent over 1 billion. That hospital should have been opened 3 years ago. We want to know, because once you have completed this particular structure, we need to make sure that there are 8 shifts. Otherwise, which means you are not serious in terms of attending to the issues of the vacancies. And hopefully, you will confirm that you will be able to pay our money, irrespective of constitutional court.
Thank you. I must confess, Honourable President, in that informal meeting, you never told me that you were in agreement for 2012. You only said, all you do, you put a figure. I told you I'm going to put a figure because you guys have not been treated. So I was not aware of the 2012 decision. If that is the case, let's implement it this year. That's my appeal. That's my appeal. On the issue of the developmental state, you know, the notion of a capitalist developmental state, the person who conceptualized it, Chalmers Johnson, in his book, MITI, 75, and analyzing from 1925 to 1975, 50 years of Japanese industrialization, followed by a number of them, Alice Amsden and them, trying to analyze this notion of the capitalist development. What is interesting, these countries never called themselves developmental states. What was observed by the scholars was their behavior. Now, part of the difficulty with us, we like calling us the different names, the developmentists, a different force of the left, or that. But in most cases, we don't act in that direction. Just wanted to make that observation and come back to, do we unhappy with low morale? Let me just say, one of the things I hate is somebody who goes to work, wake up and goes to work not happy. Now, there are not a whole range of factors. Salaries is but one. But even the way you are treated in work says a lot. There are factors which impact on morale. Salary is but one, but not the only one. But what we need to talk about in this environment is what are the key things that we need to do to ensure that we can have public service that whose morale is high. No one will ever, we'll improve salaries, there's no doubt about that, but no one will never be able to satisfy everybody. But morale is quite critical for people when they go to work. I agree with that. The housing scheme, I plead guilty. Okay. I plead guilty. I've had an interaction with the Minister of Public Service and Administration on this matter. And part of the difficulty with they were saying they were confronting is that SA home loans, whatever it is, had an exclusive arrangement. And what we need to do is to terminate that exclusive arrangement. And the major shareholder there is Standard Bank. We undertook as Treasury to take that battle with Standard Bank. I plead guilty, but commitment is there in making sure that this happens. It's a matter that we want to achieve over the next few days. When we say that the shortfall to cover the shortfall, what normally happens, I was once an MEC for finance in the province. What normally happens, we reach an agreement at the national level on what is going to be paid in cost in salaries. When we reach that agreement, it doesn't mean that the provinces have that money. Because at the time when the budget was made, the provinces were not given that money. So when it comes to implementation, in particular the two departments, they can't move resources internally in order to fund that. So, particularly in education, that 26 billion rand is intended because that increase which was agreed last year was not in the Department of Education in profit. So that's what that 26 billion was about. Now, someone can say, okay, the 1.8, someone can say, oh, you so valid something. Oh, we've closed the debate, you're going to give us 1.8% increase. No. Oh, okay. The 1.8 is a percentage of budget on non-interest spending. It's not translated into 1.8% pay for your increase. That's what it means. So, if we were to calculate that 20 billion output there, it's slightly higher than that. So, let me concede, let me concede, the definition of public service is not the same. Concede. For instance, what I did not mention is that in the definition of public service which I quoted, it included municipalities, it included public entities, these small things that we have, which you guys call a part of the agencyfication. By the way, I'm on your side. I'm not sure that whether we need those. There's a lot of these things, about 200 of them. They employ about 160,000 people. Their CEOs are paid more than DGs. I don't think it's a right arrangement. So their definition, I must concede, it includes those things, including municipalities. We are not trying to do this transfer here. My suggestion is the following. If we go back into that debate, it opens up rules we don't agree, we hate each other. I think what we're trying here to do here is to heal. When the Minister of Public Administration I've been engaging here and said, when are we going to meet? Because when I meet, I've been meeting with unions informally and trying to size them out, the leadership of those unions. All of them, they said, you know what, Nina, you can't be trusted. There's a trust difference. So they said the last time we had a strategic discussion with you was in 2010 in Bedroom 2. So we need Bedroom, the administrative days, we need Bedroom 3 now. Are you quite now? Bedroom 3 then, what I'm trying to say, let's not focus on what has divided us in the past. It's not going to be helpful for moving forward. That's going to be my way. Will National Treasury be part of the negotiations? I'm here. For study. I'm here. Ask the minister, every time he wants to meet the leadership of the unions, I'm there. Because I want us to make sure that this thing works. Now, for the mandating committee of ministers, I'm a member of that mandating committee, and I will not miss it. I'll make sure that I'm part of it. So I'm part of the negotiation. But in addition, part of the negotiation team, a treasury representative will be there. So that there's no dispute about it. I've said something about the court issue. I don't think it's worth fighting who went to court, who didn't go to court, what was the court. It's not building the kind of trust we're trying to do moving forward. What we're trying to do here is to build trust between the employer and the employee. And it's quite important. Will I use the GEPF? Oh, the GEPF is your pension. It's not something people want to mess up with. Because when you go on pension, you yourself want to show that you've got a pension. To the extent that I can use the GEPF, I'm more than happy, like all other pension funds, for them to invest in the infrastructure fund so that you get reasonable returns for your investment. I don't want the pension fund, any pension fund for that matter, not people to get usual. So GEPF will be part of that. Corruption. You know, if we go to corruption, who must be corrupt? People say a lot of the corruption. And if we were to understand who's corrupt, there's no one who's corrupt in this country. But corruption exists. You see what I mean? So what we need to do, is if this leadership here can campaign, all of these leaders here, and say corruption not in our name, all of us here. Even those who say, no, let's close the leaks. I may not know the leaks, but you may know more about the leaks than I do. All right? For instance, this week, I get someone sending a WhatsApp. He says, this person, this is the back number, this person is putting fraudulent claims to SARS. What is my duty? It will transfer that information to SARS. But if all of us here were to emerge and say we're going to campaign and say not in our name, because corruption happens in our name, not only as a politician, all of you sitting here, we are all accused as corrupt. If you are in government, whether you're official or anything, we are accused as corrupt. What teaching was telling the correct thing, that Tina's ministers, I far away from that. But all the stage, no. Some of us who are bold enough who go and tell an official what to do with the tender. The problem is the following. The PFMA says, ask this minister to write you that instruction. Right? If you watch who's on, all ministers, no embassy, okay, there's no paper, nothing. But they instructed a lot of people. There's no paper trail linking them to the activity. You know? So, my appeal to you is that you are also accused of being corrupt. We are also accused of being corrupt. This is not high time we all stand up and say we will campaign, we'll close the leaks, we'll look at everybody who's corrupt. All of them. The tender system is a problem. Section 217 of the Constitution says, for me to give service to somebody, there must be competitive, fair competition. That's what the Constitution requires. But what is happening with that? I concede, everybody complains about it. The problem is not the tender system, the problem is us. The system is nothing. We are dodging the system. The president was in Limpopo opening this road, so he was excited. Then his problem came in when he asked how much the roads cost. 14 million rand per kilometer. $14 million per kilometer. Those who come from the Eastern Cape, there's a Koitu chapter, first page in Queenstown. There's a tender for 99 million for 7 kilometers. It's in court. Now, all I'm trying to say about corruption, if this body here take a decision that no corruption in this country, all of us work hand in hand, down in every province, in every municipality, there will be no corruption in this country. There will be no corruption in this country. On the IMF loan, I beg no apologies. As part of my strategy, as part of my with something that we that statement, as part of my strategy to reduce debt, you know, when we go out, I told you that the expenditure, the revenue, the difference is about 500. This year was 600 billion. What we got from the FMF was peanuts, 750 million, which is about how much? 20 billion rand, something like that, of 600 billion. So we go out and say, who else is giving us cheap money? The IMF gave us cheap money, not as a loan. It's a decision they took to provide all member states. Now, those conditions are available in the IMF website. I don't have to go through and tell you what we did. Let me tell you what the fight we're doing. We're going to the IMF World Bank AGM 18th of April for a week. What is the fight about in that meeting? For your information, every country go to those facilities, including the developed countries. What you are saying in that meeting, you developed countries, take your share, give it to developing countries. Because you can't get debt on conditions as soft as these, because you don't need that debt. So, what I'm trying to say to you is that now I've got 600 billion to go and find out in the market. I've got to find the cheapest way in order to reduce that. And that debt which I got from the IMF was cheap. Right? The calculation is that it's 300 basis points less than what I would have got in the market. By the way, I'm not going to pay service to date until for 3 years. We State Bank, when you have got to implement this thing, you're facing challenges. Here's my challenge. People say we must buy African Bank. Now, if I buy African Bank, then I must close the State Bank, the Post Bank. That's what it means. I must close the Post Bank. Whereas I'm far advanced with the Post Bank because we've taken legislation to Parliament to commercialize the Post Bank, which is state-owned already. Now, people are saying, I must close what we have, go and take something else. It's a state bank. I'm giving effect to the notion of a state bank by commercializing the Post Bank. The Post Bank now is going to a commercial bank, the legislation before Parliament is going to a commercial bank completely. I still have development finance institutions to increase lending. The only thing with those development finance institutions is that they can't take deposits. But for lending, you've got IDC, you've got Development Bank of Southern Africa, you've got Land Bank, which is like it's going to come and stay. Okay? An interesting thing which we have, we've got 2 insurance companies. Banks have got all those arms, any bank has got those, but we're not saying how do we coordinate all of these institutions to give effect to the notion of the state bank. We've got the insurance company Sazria, which funded all of this, paid all of these challenges of the unrest. If you go into Land Bank, there's another bank, insurance there. It's sovereign, by the way. It's state-owned. So we've got all these pieces of things. We'll take a look. I've been in the not quite pay for the child. Because I will put in the midst of things. You know, if you complain and then make up. But if you are in the state situation, you can, let me tell you with vacancies. What treasure sometimes people, hey, but last night I was talking to windows. I said, windows, I'm not my voice, including the staff. My voice is 1,400. 1,400. It's big, you know. $140,000. Okay? 140,000, no 35 in the but, and some 30,000 office people. Right? Now, all those immediate man who is excited, it's going to employ 10,000 employees. Right? Now, but I was saying to him, but your funded post, 184,000. Now, is it treasury who's making them fill those funded posts? It can't be. So, what we need to do, I've sat in this meeting, somebody said, can you tell us something positive? I've sat in this meeting. This is state of play, but this is the direction of shifting the budget. That's what I've said. I've said, Among police have brought 63.9 billion. The army 31 billion. I can sign. I don't know how much health is lost. We're beginning to shift the budget in that direction. That's what I said. That's not what I said. That's a battle. It's not going to be an easy one. That's a battle we're beginning to deal. But I'm going to begin even tomorrow. I'm part of the commission. I'm able to get I'm treasury. I will negotiate. I want to understand that the non-public over. Thank you, Chair.